It is the week of the Frozen Four, and the men's ice hockey team is getting set for its matchup against BC. We will take a look into that game, and as well as how the other teams made it to that stage.
And also, Connor, we're going to take a look at some of the strong start in conference play by the men's lacrosse team and bring in our step-up and sit-down players of the week.
That's all coming up next on Bobcat Breakdown.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another jam-packed episode of Bobcat Breakdown, where hockey and lacrosse are the main storylines. Alongside the hockey guru himself, and I mean it, hockey guru, Connor Fortier. I'm Tom Albanese, and I can't talk right now. It's just so unbelievable with a hockey analyst with me right here. But nonetheless, very exciting show for you guys, where the biggest highlight is certainly the Quinnipiac men's hockey team advancing to its second Frozen Four in program history. We're going to start off by looking at how each team reached Tampa Bay. Connor, let's start with North Dakota.
Well, North Dakota have been one of the more talented teams all this season, played in the NCHC. Went 32-6-4 overall, 19-4-1 in the NCHC, which I said is one of the better hockey conferences in the country. And to get there, they had a pretty tough task. They lost to Minnesota Duluth 4-2 in the semis, and then got a tough draw against Northeastern. Everyone saw Northeastern coming into this tournament as an extremely hot team. They kind of ran right through the Hockey East towards the latter half of the year, and they had an extremely long wing streak to win it off. But they handled Northeastern, and then they went on to say Michigan. Michigan, offensively powered team. Everyone saw Michigan kind of as the dark horses going in, to this tournament, and they just handled Michigan with a final of 5-2. But I think the big important thing is that in this road, they went to the third place game in the NCHC, and they tied Denver, who we're going to talk about in a little bit, who they talked to. I think that's going to be an important game to look at because of that 1-1 tie in the third place game. Yes, it's third place. They want to play for something, but still a tie. It could lead to a funny matchup there in that Denver game, which I know you're going to talk about right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're talking about the Denver side, first of all, going back really quickly to what you talked about with the third place game, that was pretty much like the fifth and deciding game, so to speak, for both North Dakota and Denver since they're conference rivals, where North Dakota played their two home games, when they played rather at home against Denver, they ended up winning both games. But when Denver was the home team, they swept them at home. So, I mean, it's really interesting when you talk about both of these teams. Now, on the other side for Denver, overall record of 25-9-6, finished conference play with only 5 losses, pretty impressive near the top of the leaderboard. And what's really unique about Denver is, like North Dakota, they were really a top 10 to top 15 team all year, pretty much so to speak. Jim Montgomery's done a great job with his staff, making sure that these players are on a doing well on a consistent basis. Swept by Nebraska Omaha in the quarterfinals. Ended up losing to St. Cloud State, though, in the semifinals. But then, of course, as you've already touched on, 1-1 tie in the third place game as well. So these two teams, it's interesting. They're the big, if not the biggest rivals of the NCHC, then they're probably top 2, top 3 in terms of biggest rivalry games, so to speak, between two different teams. So it's really interesting how you talk about what Denver's had to overcome, and then in the end, they ended up. I don't even know if thrashing's a good word, dominating. I don't know what you could probably use for a good word, but Boston University, the one loss that Quinnipiac had, 7-2, and then they ended up getting past the WCHA champion in Ferris State as well. So Denver, big road to get to the Frozen Four as well. But now let's transition now to the other side of the bracket, BC against Quinnipiac. And Connor, why don't you start off with the Boston College Eagles?
Yeah, I mean, BC, everyone knows, they know this stage. They know how to get to here. They had a blazing record, 28-7-5 this year, and blazed right through the Hockey East, 15-2-5 in Hockey East play. That's if that's not the best conference in the country, I'm not too sure what is. Maybe the ECAC is a very close second, but that's a very impressive record for that conference. But of course, they lost to the Northeastern Huskies in the Hockey East tournament towards the end of the year. Big loss for them, but then they bounced back. They were able to beat a good Harvard team, which we all know here at Quinnipiac very well as the ECAC team, 4-1. Yes. That's an interesting matchup, a Hockey East team versus ECAC team. Two different type of recruiting styles for those conferences, and they beat them 4-1. They would then go on to beat Minnesota Duluth 3-2. Very close game, almost a last-second goal, but Thatcher Demko stepped up for the Eagles, as he's done all season, and stopped that. But I think the big important one there is the ECAC matchup that they had against Harvard. 4-1 win and a trumping of a very, very good Harvard team. Definitely interested, as we're going to talk about later, as they face Quinnipiac.
Yeah, and before we go to Quinnipiac, you also have to mention also that BC and Harvard actually played against each other in the Bean Pot as well. So that was a big matchup before they ended up facing each other in the Northeast Regional. And then on the other side for Quinnipiac, everybody here knows about them. They're number one team for a majority of the second half of the season. And when you talk about this team, 31 wins, now the most wins in program history after last season's 30 wins. Last season 30 wins rather. But nonetheless, the offense has just been key for the Quinnipiac the entire year. Rand Pecknell and his staff has done a tremendous job in terms of making sure that the lines are all structured, they're all in balance, and make sure that everybody has their unique role. He's been really that leader that's been really helping this team going down the line. And of course, we all remember how in Lake Placid, after they ended up winning 2 out of 3 against Cornell in the ACAC quarterfinals, which ended up being only their 3rd loss, and they haven't lost since. They ended up sweeping by Dartmouth and Harvard in Lake Placid to win their first ever Whitelaw Cup, first ever ECAC championship. And then, of course, as we all know, defeating RIT 4-0 in the East Regional semifinal, and then going by UMass Lowell 4-1, which they only held UMass Lowell to only 15 shots on net, which for a Hockey East power, as you talked about how the ECAC and the Hockey East are pretty close to each other in terms of competitiveness, but nonetheless, like Quinnipiac, they got by one Hockey East school in UMass Lowell. In terms of those big, I would probably characterize BC, BU, and UMass Lowell as probably that big core 3, so to speak, along with Providence as well in the Hockey East. They got by 2 of them, or I'm sorry, they only got by 1 of them. They lost to BU, but now it's going to be interesting to see if they can get by BC.
Now, Tom, all these teams took very different roads to get to this point, but which road is the most impressive? Who had the most impressive streak coming into getting the Frozen Four?
They're all kind of unique roads, but I'm going to have to go with North Dakota as having the biggest road to get there, just because they got under a little bit of scrutiny near the end of the playoffs, didn't end up coming on top in the NCHC tournament after they were pretty much the top seed pretty much the entire year and ended up finishing that way. But nonetheless, like what I'm looking at with this North Dakota team, and if we take a look at the brackets, they had to get by Northeastern, as you talked about earlier.
But it's a streaky Northeastern team. You never know what they're going to be. They've been hot, but they're bound to start playing like they've been themselves.
But Northeastern, like I said, like they first of all, they were on the streak. Second of all, they were a really tough team. And they can be just as physical as North Dakota was. And they actually were physical, almost out-physically beaten North Dakota in that regional game. Yes, North Dakota ended up being the better team. They have a lot more offensive weapons. We all know that. But to get by a team that's really streaky in Northeastern that more than likely came out with a much better game than they had shown earlier in the year. And then when you get by a team like Michigan, to end.
That's impressive. That is impressive.
A team like Michigan with Kyle Connor, everybody knows him, a Hobie Baker finalist. When you get by a team like that with such an offensive burst, more than likely a lot of people had Michigan upsetting North Dakota. But that didn't happen. North Dakota ended up being the better team in the end. It was a tough road in the end.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, I disagree with you. Real quick, I'm going to just say it's Denver. I thought Denver had a much better road to reach this point. Losing to St. Cloud in the semis in their conference tournament can bring them down, but then they come and, like we said, absolutely trounced BU, a very, very good Hockey East team, with that final score of 6-3. And then they went out and they beat kind of the Cinderella story that was kind of blooming, I guess you could say, in Ferris State. They had a lot of momentum after beating St. Cloud State, who I just said Denver lost to, and then was able to stop the momentum of Ferris State, able to make it there. I think that's a lot more impressive than a good North Dakota team who may have struggled against Northeastern. But we're out of time, Tuner. We're going to go on to our break. Despite the road each team has taken, Tom, they still have to go out and play the game when it all comes down to it. But when we come back on Bobcat Breakdown, one of those games we'll break down is the BC and Quinnipiac matchup. Stay right here. You're watching Breakdown.
Welcome to A Sheer Sensation, North Haven's premier cosmetology service, located at 140 Washington Avenue, minutes from Hamden. We offer an array of services, from basic cuts and colors to lash extensions and formaldehyde-free keratin treatments. We also provide hair chalk and styling for men. When you spend $60, your Q card will get you 10% off. Call us at 203-239-6477 to make your next appointment at A Sheer Sensation.
I could really go for a Ray and Mike sub right now.
Come to Ray and Mike's and try our Philly chicken and cheese for just over $4. Giant cheesesteak subs and mouth-watering boar's head sandwiches for as low as $4.75. Q-Cash accepted just a mile down the road on Whitney, here at Ray and Mike's.
Welcome back to Bobcat Breakdown, everyone. Tom and I moved away from the desk, and now we're trying to tackle this touchscreen that we have right here. We're gonna look at the matchups, the key matchups, between Quinnipiac and BC in their Frozen Four matchup this Thursday. We're gonna start with the coaches here, Tom. Who are you giving the check mark to?
Well, first let me say this, that both of these coaches, they've admired each other from afar because, as we both know, Quinnipiac and Boston College haven't played against each other at all in their all-time history between these two programs. But what's really interesting is that Rand Pecknold has pretty much been the coach of the last couple of years, making 4 straight NCAA tournament appearances for Quinnipiac, including to the national final game. They ended up being national runner-ups. But what Jerry York has done has just been tremendous. Only coach in ever over 1,000 wins. Rand Pecknold will get there in the near future. He's going to need a couple of more years to get around 500 career wins for his resume. I think that as Jerry York's era kind of goes out, I think the Rand Pecknold era is going to begin. But for right now, clearly, I have to go with Jerry York.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to agree with you there. Like you kind of said, both of these coaches are some of the more accredited coaches all time in college hockey history. Rand Pecknold brought Quinnipiac basically up from the depths of Division I hockey to the stage they're on now. But Jerry York is probably the best college hockey coach active right now. The wins he has, over 1,000 wins. This is going to be his 10th Frozen Four appearance with BC, 12th overall. That is the key right there. That number of appearances, and he knows how to get there. He knows how to win in here too. So it's definitely the check mark is going to go to Jerry York for me for the BC Eagles. We're going to talk about the forwards next. So both of these forward lines, a lot of depth in both of these, a lot of high scoring in both of these type of 9 players, and
Absolutely.
for both of these teams, both really carried them really here to this point. Who are you giving the check mark to here?
I'll tell you this, Connor. This is actually the closest in terms of which team stands over which team, in my mind, out of all these categories that we're going to cover in this segment. But you look at these players right here, Sam Annis, Travis St. Dennis, and Landon Smith line, one of the deadliest lines in all of college hockey right now. And Tim Clifton and Soren Janssen, that line has also been tremendous as well. And Scott Davidson, as we talked about, he's been on a tear of late as well. One of the young freshmen that have really stepped up for this Bobcat team. And then, of course, when you're looking at these players for BC, really quick to the point, they are tremendous players. Ryan Fitzgerald's been doing such an unbelievable job, and Colin White. These two players in particular, that line is really tough. Now, in terms of who am I going to give my check to, really tough, I'm actually going to side with Quinnipiac by the slightest of margins, just because I think that overall, as a 4-line collective unit, all 4 lines together, I think Quinnipiac edges out BC just by the smack a little bit. But don't get me wrong, BC is really good as well, but nonetheless, their 3rd and 4th line, I'd lack a little bit behind Quinnipiac. Quinnipiac, their 4 lines as a whole, all 4 have been really productive. I got to go with Quinnipiac.
Something's wrong with us two now. We're agreeing too much right now, because I'm also going to go with Quinnipiac as well. That's an unpopular pick to a lot of people in the college hockey nation. Maybe not in this area of Connecticut, but in the college hockey nation, because we see the Ryan Fitzgeralds, the Colin Whites. They're putting up a lot of points, and they see that 10 people have double-digit points for BC, and they're like, oh my God, that's so cool. But at the same time, you got to think about it in perspective. Quinnipiac has 5 people, players in double-digit goal categories. Scott Davidson has 9, and then right after that, there's 4 other players, that have 7 goals. The closest person on the BC team that doesn't have 10 goals has 6 goals. Yeah. And when you talked about rolling the 4 lines, I think being able to roll those 4 lines is really what's going to thrust Quinnipiac over BC in this one, because if you're 4th line and you can match them up with a lower line of BC, and your 4th line, you're rolling out Soren Janssen, Scott Davidson, Tim Clifton, 3 really good role players for this team, I think it's going to be a really good intangible. I'm going to throw another intangible into the mix too. Absolutely. Their power play has been really good, operating just under 20% on the year, and BC takes a lot of penalties in the game, right around 5. So if these forwards in the power play can kind of get going at the same exact time as they take penalties, this is why I think they deserve the check mark from BC.
That's the biggest thing that you talked about in terms of the power play, is that the power play advantage, you got to give it to Quinnipiac, especially with that Sam Annis, Landon Smith, and Travis St. Dennis trio right there. All 3 of them have a lot of power play goals and have contributed big time to Quinnipiac when they're on the man advantage.
And part of the power play is the defense, and that's what we're going to go into right now, Tom.
Let's see if we agree on this one, Connor. I don't know.
So defense, here we are. Pause it here.
Why don't you start this one, Connor?
All right, I'll start this one off. Yeah. defense is, we all hear the classic term defense wins championships, and part of the defense is having a goaltender as well, which we'll touch on in a little bit. But defense of these two teams, I think this is the most overwhelming category that QU has on it. I'm going to give them my check mark for this one. So get the draw game going. I'm going to give them my check mark on this one, guys,
There it is.
simply because I think it's the depth. BC, Teddy Doherty is their senior leader, but everyone else is kind of freshmen. They do have some future NHLers on that squad and that decor for BC, but I really don't know if they're ready for this stage. BC is a very, very, everyone expects you to make the Frozen Four, and that's a lot of expectations to put on a freshman. And if you look at the core for the Quinnipiac, Taves, Clifton, Prisky as a freshman being able to contribute as he is. But I think another good point here is having Alex Minor-Barron, the senior, and Derek Smith, one of the unsung heroes on this team. He does everything right, blocks shots, gets in the shooting lanes. I think it's going to be a really important factor in how they will be much better than the defense of BC.
Really interesting how you talked about, and you hit the nail on the head, by the way, in terms of BC having a little more freshman-oriented defense like Teddy Doherty, one of the young freshmen on the team. Obviously, Chase Prisky is a freshman as well in the Bobcats, but he has been so tremendous, especially later in the season. His numbers have been starting to pick up the pace a little bit. Devon Taves, one of the members of the All-Region team, along with Scott Davidson and Sam Anderson, their East Regional. And Connor Clifton, he's physical, he's really motivated, and he wants to win a national championship before his senior year. Now, obviously, he's only a junior. He does have next year, but he has the collective unit of this team now. There's no stopping them. Now, what's really interesting is how BC, they have the #1 scoring defense in the nation. Quinnipiac #3.
Yep.
But when you take into consideration of what BC has lagged of late, Quinnipiac had a strong regional, scoring 8 goals, only giving up the 1 to UMass Lowell. But in the end, BC's defense has been kind of struggling of late. They almost blew their lead to Ferris State. As Ferris State, the third period goals, to end up losing it right there. But in the end, again, I got to agree with you on this one. We're going to go
This
Quinnipiac
is something I've
again.
never seen before. I'll agree that much.
But we still have a couple more topics, so we'll see if we can go at it.
Yep,
right
as you said, we're going to move on to our next topic. And this one, we're going to talk about the goalies. Two really good goalies in this matchup, and Michael Gartig and Thatcher Demko. So, why don't you start off with this one?
All right, well, again, what you're seeing these two stats right here in terms of the 1.83 goals against average for Gartig and 1.85 for Demko. I don't know. You can't get any closer to that. But, I mean, when you're looking at the way that these two players have been, one key thing, though, that sparks in my mind, Connor, Michael Gartig was on the bench for Eric Hartzell when they made it to the Frozen Four back in 2013. And then in the end, he saw the experience. He knows what it takes to win a national championship. Back in 2012, when Boston College won the Frozen Four in Tampa, Demko was not on the roster yet. So I'm going to give the little more experience. I'm going to go with Gartig on this one.
I'm going to disagree with you here, and I'm going to go with Thatcher Demko. Really quickly, why? Yes, these two are very similar in 1.83 goals against 1.85. But Demko, as we just mentioned, we really don't like the BC matchup for defense. Demko has done more with less. Very likely he can win the Hobie Baker this year. He's set a new career high in games played and games won. He knows how to go far into the season, where Michael Gartig has only really played one game in his playoff career as a starter. Demko knows how to go far in the season, but I know we're going to have to move on to break after this. Sorry to cut you off, Tom. I know we can go back and forth all day about this.
Kidding,
but when we come back, Tom and I will look at the men's lacrosse team, and also we're going to give you our step-up and sit-down players of the week, as well as the game to watch. Stay right here.
Welcome to A Sheer Sensation, North Haven's premier cosmetology service, located at 140 Washington Avenue, minutes from Hamden. We offer an array of services, from basic cuts and colors to lash extensions and formaldehyde-free keratin treatments. We also provide hair chalk and styling for men. When you spend $60, your Q card will get you 10% off. Call us at 203-239-6477 to make your next appointment at A Sheer Sensation.
I could really go for a Ray and Mike sub right now.
Come to Ray and Mike's and try our Philly chicken and cheese for just over $4. Giant cheesesteak subs and mouth-watering boar's head sandwiches for as low as $4.75. Cash accepted just a mile down the road on Whitney, here at Ray and Mike's.
Welcome back to Bobcat Breakdown. This week, the men's lacrosse team faced off against Marist in a MAAC championship rematch, and it was an exciting one, Tom. With 3 seconds left in regulation, senior Ryan Keenan scored for Quinnipiac to send the game into overtime. And then in overtime, with just 1 second left, Anthony Carachetta put away a goal and won the game for the Bobcats. Tom, Quinnipiac went into that fourth quarter down 5-1. What do you make of a win like this against the favorite to win the MAAC?
It's a big win, obviously, because as we talked about it, last season, Quinnipiac, they ended up falling to Marist twice. One game matchup they played in the regular season, and then, of course, the MAAC championship game last season. Marist ended up defeating Quinnipiac, and it was by, there was a lot of goals. I think if I remember correctly, last year it was like a 15-11 win in terms of the MAAC championship game. So these two teams can really score. They got a lot of offense, but in the end, this game for Quinnipiac definitely proved that they could step up and play with the big boys, so to speak, as Marist in men's lacrosse. And I mean, you mentioned it, when you're looking at Ryan Keenan and Anthony Charretta, everything that they've done so far for this Quinnipiac team, 2 of the leading scorers on the squad, and 3 goals for Keenan in the game, and Charretta had 2 as well. These 2 people, they lead this offensive charge for Quinnipiac, and they ended up picking up the big win.
I like how you mentioned the offensive charge, but a big thing in lacrosse, and as we can see in this game, is possession and defense.
Oh, yes.
Will Vitelli took every face-off for Quinnipiac and won every
single
face-off.
one. Yep.
Now, he won MAAC Player of the Week, MAAC Men's Lacrosse Player of the Week, and then Jack Brust, the goalie for Quinnipiac, won the Defensive Player of the Week. If Quinnipiac can keep those 2 up, as Vitelli's kind of a Fogo guy, face-off, get-off type of person, he is absolutely killing it in that role. And like I said, it's possession and defense when it comes to lacrosse. And in a conference, a good conference like the MAAC, it's a good start for them as they've started 2-0. They kind of jumbled around in non-conference play, 3-3, kind of started off the year in the middle of the road. 2-0 to start conference play, and that is a big difference maker. To talk about that for a second.
Yeah, a big difference maker, because I mean, first regarding the fact that he ended up getting all the face-off, that was virtually incredible. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before. But what's really interesting in that game was Quinnipiac did commit 21 turnovers, their biggest of the season, and they still ended up putting enough shots on net, and they ended up winning the game. But then moving on, as we talked about, in terms of how they have this tremendous start of conference play, they started out 1-2 last season in conference play. Not the best start. This season they are 2-0. And to beat a team like Marist before they end up going on to play the teams, including Detroit and Canisius, 2 other teams that met with Quinnipiac and Marist in last year's MAAC championship. I mean, when you take a look at this Quinnipiac team, they're off to the strong start that they needed, and I think the out-of-conference schedule play really helped them as well in terms of preparing for what they would need to face in the MAAC schedule.
All right, well, definitely a strong start to the men's lacrosse team, Tom. But now let's take a closer look at what lies ahead for Quinnipiac Athletics. We've already discussed it on today's show. The Frozen Four in Tampa is the biggest event everyone's looking forward to this week. But besides the hockey game, what is your next best game to watch this week?
Well, of course we have to go besides the hockey game, because we know everybody's going to tune in for that. But for the game to watch for me this week, I'm going to go with the Quinnipiac softball team. 3-1 in their last 4 games. Of course, they did kind of play 2 inferior opponents in Fairleigh Dickinson and Hartford, excuse me. They ended up sweeping Fairleigh Dickinson, winning 1 of 2 against Hartford. Maybe not the best game that they had there, but nonetheless, the softball team, I had called their 2 doubleheader games against Maine for the Quinnipiac Bobcat Sports Network, and what I saw in that game was so many errors, so many inconsistencies for this team, yet they just beat 3 out of the 4 games for the inferior opponents that they were supposed to beat. Now comes conference play. This game that I'm going to watch, doubleheader against Monmouth on Saturday. This is officially their first conference games, as they really should have played their first conference games this past week, but of course it got postponed due to rain. So this is going to be their first conference games. I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do against conference foes.
I'm also going to stay on the diamond but go a little bigger as the men's baseball team face off against Siena. This was a team that was expected to win the MAAC this year after a very strong start. And after a very strong season last season. Not exactly the strongest start so far this season for the Quinnipiac baseball squad. But if they want to make up the ground that they've starting to begin to lose, it's this weekend against Siena. That's going to be a really, really important time for John Delaney's squad. As we've noticed, as we've been talking about, they've had this was kind of a season for them. They were supposed to really get on this season and take a hold of it, and right now they haven't too. I'm going to look for that team to take a hold of it this season.
All right, Connor, so now we're going to move into our step up and sit down segment of the show. So for you, what player really stepped up this week in your eyes?
I'm going to take a cop-out. I'm not going to take a player. I really couldn't choose when it comes down to it. But I'm actually going to go with the QU women's rugby team. Yes, Quinnipiac, they are still playing. After winning the national championship this fall, they are moving on and they're playing tournaments in their spring season. This past weekend, they won the Quinnipiac Sevens tournament, went 5-0 in the tournament, outscored opponents 110-31. Sevens is a different style of rugby. It's less people, as you say, by sevens. And they still dominated teams like Harvard, AIC, big teams in the women's rugby spectrum. So I'm giving that rugby squad the step-up player of the week.
All right, so I'm also going to do in terms of one individual player, but I'm also going to reference the team as a whole. I'm going to go actually a team that they don't get a lot of coverage on this campus. I'm going to go with the women's tennis team, and I'm looking at Sophia Dzulynsky, the only senior on this squad. She's really picked up the pace, helped this team start out undefeated in conference play, leading them all the way through all their opponents. But one really interesting, Connor, and get ready for this one. Since moving to the MAAC for all Quinnipiac athletics in 2013 and 2014, the women's tennis team, get ready for this, they are a perfect 23-0.
It's impressive.
Against conference foes in MAAC play. It's mind-blowing. I mean, I don't understand how that can happen for one particular team, but when you look at this team, just such an unbelievable job. And after head coach Mike Quicko decided to retire, he left this program in great hands, and the women's tennis team is moving right along and having a great season. And again, that conference number, I still can't believe it. But moving now right along to those players who maybe could have done a better job for their respective teams. So who do you got for your sit-down player of the week?
I'm going to go with Thomas Jankins of the QU baseball team. We mentioned that the QU baseball team was expected to do really, really well this season, and Jankins was a pitcher expected to do exceptionally well.
He was supposed to be their ace.
He was supposed to be their ace. He came into relief this week against Seton Hall, and a 2 1/3 inning pitch, let up 2 earned runs, 2 hits, and walked a guy. Not exactly what you want as a guy that's supposed to be your ace. I believe he can bounce back from it, and I think he can because we saw what kind of stuff he has. It's really good stuff, and we saw him lead this team last year into the MAAC tournament. But you definitely want to see more out of your ace and as your prospective ace when you come into that. QU was down 3-1 when they came into that, and then he came in. They all of a sudden found themselves down 5-1. That's not what you want out of your leading pitcher on the team. And if, like we mentioned, we expect this QU baseball team to really take a hold this weekend, I expect Jenkins to have a big weekend after that too.
Yeah, and when you mentioned Thomas Jenkins, I had the opportunity to interview him earlier before the season started, and he knew that he needed to be that ace, and he's kind of got off to the rocky start. So I can agree with you on that one. But in terms of my sit-down player, I'm actually going to go along with Kyle Larkin. She's the goalkeeper for the women's lacrosse team right now. The team is 2-8 right now, 0-2 so far in conference play. She's let up about 11 goals per game. That's just not going to get the job done. And in the end, this women's lacrosse team, they need more offense for to step up and to go along with players like Kathleen DeVito and Allison Kuhn. And I'm sorry, when you give up about 11 goals per game, that doesn't put your team in the best chance to win. And also only 11 of their 30 players on their roster have at least 1 point. Not much offense in terms of depth, not much spreading around the wealth, so to speak. This women's lacrosse team needs to step up in my mind, and it all starts with their goalkeeper, Kyle Larkin.
All right, Tom, we'll make sure to watch all of that, including, of course, the Frozen Four matchup. Who do you have in that one real quick?
I got Quinnipiac over BC, and then I got them facing North Dakota in the championship game.
I got Quinnipiac and Denver in the national championship game. That just made. But that will do it for another episode of Bobcat Breakdown. For past episodes and more information about the show, make sure to visit our website at q30television.com and theqbsn.com.
Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter at Q30Television and at QBSN.
For Tom Albanese, I'm Connor Fortier. Have a great week, everyone.